René Descartes was a well-educated Catholic French philosopher and mathematician. He brought methods and reasoning used in mathematics to the philosophy field and revolutionized it. He is known as the father of modern philosophy and is most famous for his "I think, therefore I am" statement. This proposition was the one thing that Descartes knew he could not doubt because he was the one doing the doubting, which proves that he certainly does exist. His existence is the one thing that he knew to be real for certain. Speaking of reality, another thing René Descartes is quite famous for is his dualistic perspective on what is real. Descartes' theory proposes that mind and matter work together to define something. For example, the French philosopher believed that humans were made up of mind and body. One could not exist without the other. He says that the mind and the body make contact through the pineal gland, which is a small gland in the brain. For example, if someone was to break their leg, physically their bone would be broken. But in order to feel that pain, they would have to understand it. It is a combination of the body and the mind that allows them to feel the pain. If this person broke their leg, it would also affect their mood, which shows another relationship between the mind and the body. However, apart from humans, Descartes believed that everything else in the universe was either made up of mind or matter, not both. Going back to Descartes' "I think, therefore I am," thinking for him was very important. So important that he considered a human to only be a person if they had the ability to think, and only humans were capable of doing this. Australian philosopher Peter Singer argues against this statement, saying that some animals have the ability to think, which means that they should be considered persons too. Descartes and John Locke both believed that thinking is what makes humans so unique. Though, according to them, someone who, say, was in a coma is not considered a person because they no longer have the ability to think. Or if someone is daydreaming, not thinking about anything, according to Descartes, they would not be considered a person. The French philosopher also had an opinion on the soul. He says that it is immortal and a part of God and will exist as long as he exists, and when the body dies, the soul is set free. René Descartes believed that logically God exists because God's existence stems from God's essence. This means that God must exist since there can be nothing greater than God. This argument for the existence of God is called the ontological argument, which was originally created by Saint Anselm in the 11th century. Here is the argument. We conceive God as only an infinite perfect being. A being who had all perfections except for the perfection of existence would not be most perfect. Therefore, the most perfect being necessarily exists. Other philosophers have found flaws in this argument. Specifically, Immanuel Kant found a flaw in the second premise. He argues that existence isn't a perfection, so therefore in order for God to be most perfect, he doesn't need to exist if existence isn't a perfection. Descartes, like Plato, was a rationalist. He believed that much of our knowledge is innate, meaning that knowledge is already within us beforehand. This is called a priori knowledge. Rationalists believe that knowledge can be acquired through reason and that sensory experience is unreliable. For example, if a rationalist understood what slavery was, then using logic, they would know that it is terrible. They would not need to see it or experience it in any way. Descartes used the existence of God as an example. He argues that our knowledge of God and his perfections comes not from our senses but from reason and intellect. As expected, other philosophers disagreed with Descartes. Aristotle and John Locke were empiricists and said that knowledge was not a priori but a posteriori, meaning that knowledge is only acquired through senses and experiences after birth. Immanuel Kant then came up with an amazing idea to bridge the gap and combine both rationalism and empiricism. René Descartes was a revolutionary philosopher that contributed greatly to the field of philosophy. His famous "I think, therefore I am" influenced many people, and even though he passed away many years ago, he still continues to influence people.